What would you do if someone decided your private driveway was their personal parking spot and daily alarm clock? In today's story, one man's response to an entitled driver is a masterclass in how to handle it. I don't own a car and happen to live at the very end of a cul-de-sac. Now, a cul-de-sac is basically a street with no exit. So it's much easier for people to use my driveway to turn around than to attempt some complicated three-point turn. I have people using my driveway all the time to do just that. It's not a huge deal to me, though it gets a little annoying in the winter when they compact the snow, making it harder to shovel. But I let it slide. The real problem started with one of my neighbors, who had a ride service come pick up their child every day. The driver of the van, a guy I'll call Gary, developed a very specific and very irritating routine. He would pull right into my parking spot and, at precisely 8 a.m., start laying on the horn. This was a major issue for me, as I worked night shifts, usually from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. So, while 8 a.m. was the start of his day, it was the middle of my sleep schedule. Every time he'd honk me awake, I could never get back to sleep, which is why I desperately needed him to stop. To make matters worse, half the time he wouldn't even stay on the driveway. He'd be half parked on what little lawn I have. I decided to handle it diplomatically at first. I spoke to my neighbor, explaining that I didn't mind her driver using the spot, but the honking had to stop, and he needed to stay off my grass. She said she'd talk to him, but nothing changed. So, I took it upon myself to speak with Gary directly. I walked out one morning and confronted him. His response was immediately hostile. "What's your problem, man? It's not like you're using it," he snapped. Patiently, I repeated myself, "I don't mind you using it, but you have to stay off my grass and you can't be honking every morning." I even suggested that he could simply wait for the kid to see him. Or, God forbid, get out of the car and knock on the door. To him, this was apparently a ridiculous and inhumane request. My next attempt was a bit more direct. I left a plastic recycling bin at the foot of my driveway. Surely that would send the message. Nope. He just ran right over it. Fed up, I called the dispatch for the ride service. They informed me that their drivers were technically self-employed subcontractors, but they promised to pass along the message. That, it turned out, was a mistake. The very next day, I was woken up by furious pounding on my front door. It was Gary, and he was livid. "How dare you call my boss? You stupid piece of shit. What the fuck is wrong with you?" he screamed. I stood my ground. "It's quite simple," I said calmly. "You were told not to use my driveway if you were going to drive on my lawn and wake me up every morning. Now get off my doorstep." He threatened to sue me if he lost his job. And I just told him, "You've been warned. Don't trespass on my driveway or property again." Gary stormed off, shouting obscenities. He was convinced he had won the argument. He had no idea that his arrogance had just set a very cold, very solid trap for himself. This confrontation happened on a Thursday. The kids had a PD day on Friday, and the forecast for the weekend was one of those delightful Canadian cold snaps, with the temperature dropping to -40 degrees. For my American friends, -40 is that magical point where Celsius and Fahrenheit meet up. So yes, it's freaking cold. An idea began to form. That night, I grabbed one of my more beat-up plastic garbage bins, carefully plugged all the holes with a generous amount of duct tape, and stuck a sign on it that read, "Private property. Driveway not for public use." Then, I filled it to the brim with water and left it at the end of my driveway. I knew my neighbor's kid was always the first to be picked up, so there was no danger to any other children, just Gary and his van. Monday morning. I was up, enjoying a coffee and watching from my kitchen window. Just as expected, Gary's van pulled up. He saw the garbage can. He saw the sign. For a moment, he just stared at it. Then, a defiant look crossed his face. He backed his van up a little, revved the engine, and charged directly at the bin, clearly intending to obliterate it and teach me a lesson. This single decision revealed Gary's greatest flaw, a blinding entitlement that made him believe he could bully his way through any obstacle. He was about to learn that some obstacles don't budge. Instead of the satisfying plastic explosion he expected, there was a sickening crunch of metal and plastic. The van stopped dead. He hadn't rammed a flimsy container. He'd rammed a solid block of ice. The front end of his van was seriously damaged. He got out, his face a perfect mask of fury and disbelief, and immediately called the cops. Then he started pounding on my door again, screaming that I was going to buy him a new car and was about to be arrested. The police officer arrived and patiently listened to Gary's ranting. Then, he turned to me. When he finally spoke, his words were a beautiful summary of the situation. "So let me make sure I understand this," the officer began, looking at Gary. "He asked you not to park here if you couldn't refrain from honking. Then warned you not to park here and put up a barrier. Now you expect him to be charged and pay for damages you caused yourself to your vehicle in an attempt to destroy his own personal property?" It was in that precise moment, under the cold sky and the even colder gaze of a police officer, that the flimsy shield of Gary's self-righteous anger shattered, leaving only the stark, embarrassing truth of his own actions. I will never forget the look on Gary's face when the officer deadpanned, "Yeah. That's not how this works." The officer then turned to me and asked if I wanted to pursue charges for the damage to my garbage bin. I just gave him the most satisfying, crap-eating grin I could muster and said, "Nah. I think we're good." I went back inside to enjoy my morning coffee, watching from my kitchen window as Gary paced back and forth in the freezing cold. He had to wait for a tow truck and make the humiliating call to his company to explain why they needed to send another driver to complete his route. I never saw him again. It was a moment of pure, chilled justice. As one commenter perfectly put it, "Congratulations, he played himself." And the best part? All it cost me was a roll of duct tape, some water, and a trash can. This story is a cold reminder that if you continuously and disrespectfully push past someone's reasonable boundaries, you shouldn't be surprised when they finally build a solid wall in front of you. So, what do you think? Was this icy revenge perfectly served? Or would you have pressed charges like some commenters suggested? Let us know in the comments below.